You don't belong here anymore, Dad. Just sit quietly in the back where no one notices you. Those were the words my own son, Matthew, whispered to me on the day of my wife's funeral. My knees nearly buckled right there in the front pew of St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The sanctuary smelled of lilies and polished oak, sunlight filtering through stained glass as hymns hummed softly from the organ. I was burying my wife of 43 years, my Margaret, the woman I'd built a home with, raised 2 children with, worked overtime shifts 4 at the John Deere plant just to give her the life she deserved. And my son, my flesh and blood, was telling me to hide, to sit in the shadows while he and his sister paraded around up front like royalty. I swallowed the hurt, my throat burning. Around me, friends and neighbors whispered condolences, but in my own family pew, I felt like an intruder. Matthew stood tall at the podium, delivering a eulogy that felt less like a tribute and more like a performance. His voice rang out, "Mom always said we'd carry her legacy forward, and now it's up to us, me and Sarah, to make sure her memory isn't wasted. Us, not Dad. Just him and his sister." I clenched my hands in my lap. The wedding band Margaret slipped on my finger back in '79, digging into my skin. When Sarah rose to speak, she echoed the same sentiment. Mom trusted Matthew and me to take care of things when she was gone. She knew Dad. Well, Dad means well, but sometimes he can't handle everything. The congregation chuckled lightly, as if she'd cracked a harmless joke. But I knew better. That wasn't a joke. That was a knife. I kept my head down, shame washing over me. But inside, another feeling stirred. Something steadier, something sharper. I knew what Margaret had left behind. I knew the will. I knew the trust. I knew that despite their smug words in that church, my children were walking headfirst into a storm they couldn't control. Before I go on, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. Because this isn't just a story about grief. It's about betrayal, about greed, and about the day the truth cracked open right in the middle of that church and made my children weep harder than they ever did for their mother. But let me back up, so you understand exactly how we got here. I was born and raised in Iowa, the son of a mechanic and a school secretary. I worked hard, never made much money, but I never complained. After Margaret and I married, we scraped together enough for a down payment on a modest house near the river. We raised Matthew and Sarah there, Christmas mornings, backyard barbecues, scraped knees patched at the kitchen table. I worked extra shifts at the plant so my kids could have what I didn't. College tuition, new clothes, family trips. Margaret stretched every dollar like magic. And now, at the very moment I needed my children's support the most, they treated me like a burden, like a man unworthy of standing beside the woman he'd loved for a lifetime. That night, after the funeral, I sat alone in the living room, the house eerily quiet without Margaret's laugh bouncing off the walls, and I thought about my children's words, about the way the congregation looked at me, pitying. I wasn't angry yet, not fully, but I knew, deep down, that something wasn't right, that Matthew and Sarah weren't just being cruel. They were laying groundwork, and when I opened the old cedar chest in the bedroom and saw Margaret's neatly organized files, her letters, her final will, the trust documents we'd signed years ago, my suspicion turned into certainty. They thought I was a weak old man who'd sit quietly in the back, but they were about to find out I had one last fight in me. 3 days after Margaret's funeral, I was sitting at the kitchen table sipping coffee gone cold, when I heard the front door creak open. No knock, no call, just footsteps. Confident, entitled. It was Matthew and Sarah. Matthew strolled in first, his leather jacket slung over his shoulder, Sarah trailing close behind with her phone in hand, thumbs tapping furiously. "Dad," Matthew said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We need to talk about Mom's affairs." I looked up from the chipped mug in my hand. "What about them?" Sarah leaned against the counter like she owned the place. "Well, you know, the house, the accounts, everything. We just want to make sure things are handled properly. Properly." That word hung heavy in the air. I set the mug down and forced a calm tone. "Your mother and I handled everything before she passed. It's all written down. Clear as day." Matthew smirked, tugging at his jacket sleeve. "Come on, Dad, let's be honest. You're not exactly the best with money. Remember when you refinanced the house in '09 and nearly lost it? Mom always told us not to let you get in over your head." The words stung. I remembered those nights, working double shifts during the recession, juggling bills, nearly drowning, but I'd kept us afloat. Margaret never went without. "The kids never went hungry," Sarah chimed in, her voice sharp. "Mom trusted us, Dad. She said so. She wanted us to make sure you were comfortable. That means Matthew and I should probably take control of the assets. The house especially." My jaw tightened. "The house?" "Yeah," Matthew said, casual as if he were talking about a used car. "It's too much for you, Dad. You're alone now." "Big house. Too many memories. It makes sense for Sarah and me to split it. Sell it, maybe. You can move into something smaller. Easier for you. Smaller. Easier." What he really meant was, get out. Hand it over. I stared at them, and in that moment, I saw something I hadn't wanted to admit. My children weren't mourning. They were circling, like vultures. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping the floor. "Your mother and I made our decisions together. You'll see soon enough." Matthew chuckled under his breath. "Dad, you really think she left this place to you? You think she trusted you to manage everything?" "That's adorable," Sarah added. "We already talked to Aunt Helen. She said Mom confided in her. Mom didn't want you overwhelmed. She wanted us to handle things." It felt like the walls were closing in, every word pressing tighter on my chest. I wanted to shout, to slam my fist on the table, to remind them that I'd built this life brick by brick. That without me, they wouldn't have the college degrees, the vacations, the very roof over their heads. But I didn't. Instead, I walked past them, down the hallway, and into the bedroom. I opened that cedar chest again, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from restraint. I pulled out the stack of documents Margaret had prepared. Her will, her trust, her letters to me. I didn't show them to my children that day. Not yet. I just held them close, tucked them back safely, and returned to the kitchen. "Your mother was a wise woman," I said quietly, looking Matthew square in the eye. "Wiser than either of you give her credit for. She didn't leave things to chance. She didn't leave me to fend for myself." Sarah rolled her eyes. "We'll see about that." And then they left, the slam of the door echoing through the house like a gunshot. That night, I sat in the dark living room, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My anger had grown roots, deep ones. They thought they had me cornered. They thought grief made me weak. But what they didn't know was that Margaret had left me more than love letters and memories. She had left me power. And when the lawyer called to confirm our meeting the following week, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Resolve, because I wasn't about to lose everything I'd bled for, not to strangers, and certainly not to my own ungrateful children. The day of the meeting at Henderson and Myers law offices, I polished my old brown shoes and put on the same navy blazer I'd worn to Margaret's funeral. I wasn't dressing for them. I was dressing for her, for the dignity she always carried with grace. The office sat on Main Street, Cedar Rapids, tucked between the bank and the diner where Margaret and I had eaten countless breakfasts. I could smell the bacon and coffee from across the street. And for a moment, I almost turned my car that way. But instead, I tightened my grip on the folder Margaret had left me and walked into the building. The receptionist, a young woman with glasses perched on her nose, greeted me kindly. Mr. Harris? Mr. Myers will see you now. Inside, my son and daughter were already seated. Matthew lounged back in the leather chair, one leg crossed over the other, confidence radiating from him. Sarah was flipping through her phone, not even looking up when I entered. "Dad," Matthew said with mock cheer. "Glad you could make it. Let's keep this simple, yeah?" I didn't respond. I simply sat, placing the folder gently on the table like a weapon no one else knew was loaded. Mr. Myers, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "We're here to review the estate of the late Margaret Harris." Now, Margaret was thorough. She left behind a will, a trust, and certain stipulations regarding her assets. Sarah perked up, finally setting down her phone. "Exactly. Mom told us she wanted us to take care of things. She didn't want Dad overwhelmed. That's why we're here," Matthew added quickly. "Yeah, Dad shouldn't have to deal with all this. It'll be easier if Sarah and I handle the house, the accounts, everything." I sat silently, letting them talk, my pulse steady. Mr. Myers adjusted the stack of papers in front of him. "Actually, that's not entirely accurate. Margaret left very clear instructions. She stated that all property, including the family home, is to remain in the sole possession of her husband, Daniel Harris. That would be you, Mr. Harris." Silence. Matthew blinked, his smirk faltering for the first time. Sarah sat up straight, color draining from her face. "That can't be right," she said sharply. "Mom told us—" "Unless she wrote it down," Mr. Myers interrupted. "It doesn't matter what was said. The will is the final word, and I can assure you, Margaret was very specific. She wanted Daniel to remain in the home, and she wanted him to have full control of their joint assets." Matthew's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, glaring at me. "You're just gonna sit there and take it all, Dad? After everything? Mom wanted us to share the responsibility." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, measured. "Your mother trusted me because she knew what I carried for this family. I worked nights when you two were kids so you could go to college. I nearly lost this house in 2009, but I didn't. I held us together. She knew I could handle it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but not from grief. From frustration. "This isn't fair. We're her children." "And I was her husband," I said, my voice low but steady. "The one who stood by her side when she was sick. The one who held her hand in hospice. Where were you two then? Where were you when she needed you most?" Neither of them spoke. Mr. Myers cleared his throat again. "There's more. Margaret also left a series of personal letters for Daniel. They're private, but I will confirm. They make it abundantly clear she wanted him to have peace of mind. That was her final wish." I could feel the folder at my side, those letters burning like fire in my hands. I didn't need to show them now. "Not yet." Matthew finally slammed his palm on the table. "This isn't over. If Dad thinks he can keep everything, he's got another thing coming." Sarah nodded quickly, her voice trembling with rage. "We'll fight this. We'll get what we deserve." But their threats no longer rattled me, because I knew something they didn't. Margaret had left me more than just the house and accounts. She'd left me leverage, something that would end their greed once and for all. As we walked out of the lawyer's office, Matthew shoved past me, his shoulder colliding with mine. "You'll regret this, old man." I didn't flinch. I just looked at him with the kind of calm that unsettles the guilty. Because I had already made my decision. I wasn't just going to protect what Margaret left me. I was going to expose my children for who they really were, and in front of everyone who mattered. It was a Sunday morning when the showdown came. The church bell in Cedar Rapids rang slow and heavy, its echo carrying across the small town streets. The whole congregation seemed to gather that day. Faces I'd known for decades, neighbors who'd watched my children grow up, men I'd worked shifts with at the plant, and women who'd brought casseroles when Margaret was sick. I sat in the second pew, Margaret's Bible in my hands. My children hadn't been to church in years, but suddenly there they were, Matthew and Sarah, sitting 3 rows behind me, whispering to each other. Their eyes burned holes in my back. Pastor Whitaker, a tall man with a booming voice, opened the service with scripture, but my mind wasn't on the verses. My mind was on Margaret's letters, the ones she'd left tucked inside. That folder, written in her delicate, looping handwriting, words meant not just for me, but for the truth. After the hymns, Pastor Whitaker called on me. "Brother Daniel, would you like to share a few words about Margaret today? It's been 3 months since she passed, and I know she'd want her church family to hear your heart." I stood slowly, my knees stiff, but my voice steady. "Thank you, Pastor." The sanctuary fell quiet. All eyes were on me, the widower. I glanced once over my shoulder at Matthew and Sarah. They looked confident, smug even, certain I wouldn't say anything to disturb their version of the story. I cleared my throat. "Most of you know that when Margaret passed, my children expected to inherit everything: the house, the savings, the land. They even told me outright that I didn't deserve to keep the home I built with my own hands." Gasps rippled through the pews. A few heads turned toward my kids. Sarah shrank in her seat. Matthew sat stiff, jaw tight. I continued. "But what they didn't know, what they still don't know, is that Margaret was wiser than they gave her credit for. She left me letters where she wrote the truth." I pulled the first one from the folder, my hands trembling only slightly. "This one," I said, holding it high, "was written just weeks before she passed." And then I read aloud, her words filling the sanctuary like sunlight through stained glass. "Daniel, if you are reading this, I am gone. And if Matthew and Sarah are trying to take what is yours, I need you to stand tall. You were the one who kept this family together when the bank nearly took the house. You were the one who stayed at my side through chemo. You are the one who deserves peace. Do not let our children's greed undo all you've carried. This home and my trust belong to you." The room was dead silent. I lowered the letter, my voice steady as stone. "My children claimed this was about helping me. But you all see the truth now. It was about taking from me, taking from Margaret's memory." Matthew suddenly stood, his voice sharp. "This is manipulation. He probably wrote those letters himself." "Watch yourself, son," Pastor Whitaker's voice thundered, cutting him off. "I've seen that woman's handwriting every Sunday for 30 years, in every prayer request she ever slipped into the box." "Those are Margaret's words," the congregation murmured in agreement. Sarah's face turned red, her hands clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. "Dad, you don't have to humiliate us like this. We just wanted to help." "No," I said firmly. "You wanted to control. You mocked me. You told me I didn't deserve what I bled for. And today, in front of God and this community, I'm telling you, I will not be erased." Applause began softly, then swelled like a wave. Old friends nodded. Neighbors patted my back. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt her strength in me. Matthew's face twisted with fury. He leaned toward Sarah, whispering through clenched teeth. "We'll sue him. We'll drag him through court if we have to." But what he didn't know was that Margaret had prepared for that too, because in my folder was one last letter, one with instructions about the trust, and if they tried to sue me, they wouldn't just lose. They'd destroy themselves. I looked back at them one last time and said quietly into the microphone, "You think you're fighting me, but the truth is, you're fighting your mother's last wish. And no one wins against that." The congregation gasped again. Matthew stormed out, his shoes clapping against the wooden floor. Sarah followed, her head down in shame. But I knew this wasn't over. They wouldn't walk away quietly, and I was ready for their next move. The gavel struck wood, sharp as thunder, and the courtroom in Cedar Rapids fell silent. I sat at the plaintiff's table, the old blazer snug on my shoulders, Margaret's folder in front of me. Across the aisle sat my children. Matthew in a tailored suit that didn't fit his temper. Sarah pale and stiff, her eyes darting like a cornered bird. They had sued me, just like Matthew promised. Their claim was simple, that I, their father, was unfit to manage the estate, that Margaret hadn't known what she was signing when she left everything in my care. They thought they could paint me as a senile old man, clinging to property I couldn't handle. But Margaret had seen this coming, and she'd prepared me for it. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, adjusted her glasses. We are here to hear the case of Harris versus Harris. Counsel, you may proceed. Matthew's lawyer stood, a slick man in a shiny blue suit. Your Honor, my clients only wish to honor their mother's true intent. Surely no reasonable person believes Mrs. Harris wanted her aging husband, who is no longer capable of handling financial matters, to shoulder this burden alone. I sat quietly, letting the words hang. I wanted them to dig their own grave. Then it was my turn. Mr. Myers, my lawyer, rose calmly. Your Honor, what opposing counsel fails to mention is that Mrs. Harris anticipated all of this. She did not only draft a will, she created a trust, a living trust that places all authority and ownership directly into Mr. Harris's hands, irrevocably. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's face blanched. Matthew shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Myers continued, his voice steady. Furthermore, Mrs. Harris left behind signed letters, witnessed and notarized, affirming her wishes. I have them here. He opened the folder and slid the documents across the polished oak table to the judge. Margaret's handwriting glowed off the page like sunlight through stained glass. Judge Reynolds read silently, her brow furrowed. Then she looked up. Counsel, these are indisputable. Mrs. Harris was of sound mind. Her intentions were crystal clear. Matthew suddenly stood, red-faced. This is ridiculous. He manipulated her. He made her sign things when she was weak. Enough, the judge snapped. Do you have proof of that claim? Matthew's mouth opened, then closed. Nothing. Sarah began to cry softly, whispering, This isn't fair. This isn't fair. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, her voice firm. What isn't fair, Ms. Harris, is attempting to strip your father of his home and his dignity when your mother left explicit instructions. What isn't fair is dragging this matter to court in the face of overwhelming evidence. The gavel struck again. This case is dismissed. All assets remain in the sole possession of Mr. Harris. Furthermore, the court finds this case frivolous. Counsel, I will be considering sanctions for wasting this court's time. The words hit like a hammer. Matthew sank into his chair, defeated. Sarah buried her face in her hands. I sat quietly, breathing deep, my hands resting on Margaret's folder. For the first time in months, I felt light. As the courtroom emptied, a few neighbors and church friends patted my back. You did right, Daniel. Margaret would be proud, one said. I believed them. Matthew and Sarah avoided my eyes as they hurried out. Their arrogance had crumbled into silence. Their greed had cost them not just money, but respect. Maybe forever. I lingered a moment, staring at the empty judge's bench. The wood gleamed in the afternoon sun, streaming through tall windows. I thought of Margaret, her laughter in the kitchen, her hand in mine during chemo, her voice telling me not to let them take what we built. She was right. I hadn't just won a case. I'd defended her memory. When I walked out into the crisp Iowa air, I didn't feel like a bitter old man anymore. I felt free. I went home to that old cedar-sided house, the one with her rose bushes still blooming in the yard, and I sat on the porch with her Bible in my lap. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe easy. The children had lost their claim. They had lost their pride. And I had gained peace. Margaret's final words whispered back to me from her letter. This home and my trust belong to you, and at last, I believed it. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.